Arizona Science is supported by Research Corporation for Science Advancement.
For AZPM, I'm Leslie Tolbert, Regents Professor Emerita in Neuroscience at the University of Arizona, and this is Arizona Science. Today our guest is Ed Jolie, Associate Professor in Anthropology and Associate Curator of Ethnology in the Arizona State Museum. Ed's an anthropological archaeologist who focuses on Native American history and prehistory. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell us how you got drawn into the fields of archaeology, anthropology, ethnology, and maybe define those terms for us.
Sure. So I think pretty young, I grew up in the woods in southern Maryland and enjoyed being outside and enjoyed the natural world. And also being Native American, having a strong sort of awareness of where my ancestors came from and knowing that so much of the archaeology and history of North America was also my family history. I always had this deep interest in learning more about that.
Well, you were recently featured in the Washington Post for your role in verifying human footprints that appear to have been made maybe 21,000 years ago in what's now New Mexico. Tell us about that.
The common feature is this idea of sort of perishability and invisibility, that the material culture that I'm so interested in is so ephemeral, it decays, it doesn't survive. And we're dealing with these trackways at White Sands that are, upwards of 20,000 years ago that reflect the activities of people, again, in a very humanizing way that connects with a lot of people. And so I think it's in many ways outside my wheelhouse, but also perfectly within my comfort zone.
And there's something very special about it being 20,000 years, not the many thousand years younger than people thought these footprints were, because it says something about how those original native peoples arrived in New Mexico.
Indeed, it's been a longstanding question in archaeology about the precise nature and timing of the initial Native American settlement of the Americas. And for a long time, there have been sort of prevailing consensus views that it was really confined to the last 13 or so thousand years. And in the last 30, 40 years, things have sort of crept slowly further and further back in time to where now you might get most people agreeing, 15,000 years seems like a good number. So the discovery and dating of the trackways at White Sands to 21 to 23,000 years ago substantially pushes back that time frame. And that's both exciting, but I also think it's been a little bit terrifying for some archaeologists because it so dramatically flies in the face of what people understood and what we thought we knew.
How on earth do you date footprints to 20,000 years ago?
In this circumstance, very, very carefully. And I think I've often thought about the way that Matthew Bennett and Dave Bustos and Jeff Pagati and Kathleen Springer have done this work amounts to really a masterclass in chronometrics and archaeological dating, because it's complicated. The stratigraphy is not easy, and there's not a lot of datable material. Archaeologists tend to rely very heavily on radiocarbon dating, a technique that relies on our knowledge of the decay of radioactive isotopes of carbon-14, and that information is good only in terms of how it can be applied to organic materials and materials that really date to about the last 50,000 years.
Why is it so significant that these are such old footprints? I mean, what, as a Native American yourself, how does this make you think about our heritage, your heritage in particular, and what does it tell us anthropologically about what was happening all those years ago?
I think as an anthropologist, I've become very comfortable with knowing that what anthropologists are really good at is complicating things, making things more complicated, adding nuance and complexity to the way that we understand what it means to be human. And so peering back, across a vast gulf of 20,000 years, it's hard for me to sort of wrap my head around that time depth. But it does, I think, make it easier to communicate this need for dialogue between a lot of oral traditions, indigenous stories about how people and societies came to be where they are today by virtue of thinking about these considerable time depths and what facts and truths may be embedded in them and that may be reflecting this deep time depth. And, for a lot of Native people, this is old news. This is old hat. That we know that we've been here since time immemorial. And this is important validation for a lot of communities.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. This is fascinating. Dr. Edward Jolie is a leading expert in Native American archaeology and ethnology. You can listen to this and all Arizona Science conversations at azpm.org/Arizona Science. I'm Leslie Tolbert.
Thank you to Research Corporation for Science Advancement for their support of Arizona Science.